Thank you, Jackson. Now, without any further delay, I would like to invite our keynote speaker. But before I do that, let me introduce Jonathan Reichental, who is the CIO of City of Palo Alto, and my boss. Dr. Jonathan Reichental, currently the CIO for the City of Palo Alto, is a multiple award winner, technology leader, whose 25 years career has spanned both private and public sector. In 2017, he was named one of the top CIO in the world. And in 2016, he has named one of the top 20 most influential CIO in the United States. Dr. Reichental is also recognized as a global thought leader on a number of emerging trends, including urban innovation, blockchain technology, and so on and so forth. In 2013, he was recognized as one of the 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers in government in America. He's also won a Best CIO in Silicon Valley Award and a National IT Leadership Prize. His innovative work in government has been also recognized by the White House. Dr. Reichental worked with his team to apply emerging technology, innovation in our organization, and create a new value to enable work to be more meaningful and fun. He is a popular writer, including recently he has co-authored the Apps Challenges Playbook. It is free online, it's available, so if you want to access it. And he is frequent speaker on the worldwide stage for information security and technology and business-related topics. He has co-hosted a popular podcast called Drinking Wine and Talking Tech. With that, I must recognize that he was supposed to be in China today, but he has rescheduled his trip to be with us because he's a popular speaker and highly demanded speaker. So please give him a big hand and join me in welcoming him.
Very cool. Thank you, Raj, so much. It's great to work with Raj every day. We have a lot of fun. So it's terrific. And thank you to Jackson, thank you to Russ for inviting me to be part of this. It feels like I'm in a room of friends. We got the former CIO for the state of California here. Carlos is here. I got lots of colleagues from the city of Palo Alto. Roger's here from the city of Mountain View. And I've met lots of other people this morning. So it's great to be among friends to think about the future, right? And so this picture probably looks familiar to you. Most days this is what my commute looked like, and I would hazard to guess it probably looks like yours. This is the world in 2017. This is the world when half the population lives in an urban context, right? So we're talking about 3.6 billion people. Every week, another 2 million or so people move into cities, right? If you do the math real quickly, over the next 20 years, that's 2 billion more people will move into cities. It's a lot of people. By the way, if you're interested in this stuff and maybe you're in infrastructure, that means we have to build approximately about 100,000 new homes every single day, right? Some incredible challenges are being presented by the urbanization of the planet. We're basically an urban planet now. Our future belongs to cities. And right now it looks a little bit like this. Like, this is not good. This should make you very angry. It makes me angry. We sort of failed at transportation. We failed with cars. And if we don't fix this, the problem gets worse and worse and worse. In fact, in many communities, a picture like this will double over the next decade or so. And I can't imagine this picture doubling. I don't think you could imagine that too. Now, I want to take you to a slightly different topic, and that is the heating of the Earth. Take a look at this animation here of the average temperature of the Earth changing over the course of the last 100 years. Right? And as you can see, as we progress through the middle of the 20th century, things are getting a little hotter. Obviously, the orange and the red denote hotter areas. As you get towards the 1970s and towards the end of the 20th century, we have increasingly warm temperatures. We get into the 21st century, and this data goes as far as 2015, which is when the last data was accurately collected. And it was the hottest year ever recorded since we started recording temperatures, right? It's a little bit of a disturbing picture. What happened? So over the course of 100 years, the average temperature of the Earth increased by 1 degree Fahrenheit. You're maybe relieved by that. Perhaps you hear me say 1 degree and you say, oh, that's okay, only 1 degree, I feel good about that. Well, let me put it in perspective real quickly, right? If you go back just 6 degrees, you get the Ice Age, right? During the Ice Age, there was about 3,000 feet of ice where we're sitting right now, above us, right? So you don't have to move the needle very much to totally disrupt the temperature of the Earth and totally disrupt life on the planet. The climate accords in Paris of a few years ago said we have to cap out the change at just 2 degrees. Right? Remember, we've already gone 1 degree, and we're approaching that 2 degree far too fast, right? What happens when you get past 2 degrees? Well, you get to 2.5, you get to 3 degrees. You know, things like hurricanes and just extreme temperatures become much more frequent. Freezing gets more extreme. All the extremes get worse. If you get to 4 degrees, here's the bottom line. It's very hard for humans to live on the planet. I would argue that climate change trumps every other issue that we have today and in the future. We've got to solve this. And why do I even talk about this? What relevance does this have? Because we will solve this problem inside cities. Governments, city governments, urban, state governments, governments all over the world will solve it inside their communities. Now we'll come back to this topic. It's all connected in a few moments. When we think of government, or when communities think of government, what do they think of? They think of this, right? By the way, I found this picture, and the first time I used it, I happened to be in front of a San Francisco audience, and everybody recognized it. Apparently, this is the DMV, one of the DMVs in San Francisco, right? And so this is how our communities think about interacting with government in a world in which everybody wants to interact like this, right? The world is moving to this. The world is moving to mobile devices. You know that. We all know that. More people access the internet from a mobile device today, like a smartphone or a tablet, than a laptop or a desktop. We got to move as governments to this platform because that's where people are. And they want an experience more like this and less like this. So what are we presented with? We are presented with a series of very complicated challenges, right? Things we can't ignore because they're existential. These are big deal issues. These are not issues on the periphery. These are central issues to our future, the future of us, our families, our children, our friends, and the next few generations. And so the topic is really about how do we apply technology to improve quality of life that affects livability, sustainability, and workability. That's the best way I can define the mission we have inside our communities in the future. It's an absolutely fascinating topic if you are a problem solver because it is so complex and so varied. Now, there are people in this, I'm loving the light display, thank you. Lights go on, lights go off, lights go on. Thanks for that. If you are interested in this topic, it's so varied. I mean, if you're in computer science or technology, as many of us are in this room, it's one of the best areas because each of these has these deeply difficult, intractable issues. And this is not exhaustive by any means, right? If you live in a city, if you're working in a city right now, you're looking at this list and saying, Jonathan, there's tons of stuff missing. I agree. Here are some of the hottest areas. These are some of the hottest areas that we can focus on right now that are being influenced and impacted positively by the emergence of technology. Now, I want to connect all the dots here because I've kind of built a sort of general picture of some challenges we have in transportation and climate change and building a better user experience. If we look at climate change for a moment, everyone needs to make their own opinion what they think of it. There's a scientific consensus, it's real. Out of 10,000 scientific reports, only 2 to 3 dispute it. If I was a betting person, I'd say that's a high probability that the scientists are pretty accurate or they're onto something. The evidence is in front of us. You don't have to go very far to see what's happening in real terms. But how do we solve it? Because I'm an optimist, I want to actually find solutions to problems. And because that's what's interesting. And I think we have the ability more than ever, because of technology, because of a new generation of people who are so motivated about issues that we can actually begin to solve the problem. The opposite is not even thinkable, right? We have to be optimistic about this topic. So you look at climate change and you think about how can we affect it in a positive way? Well, the biggest contributor is greenhouse gas emissions. And the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions is transportation. And it's transportation inside cities. It turns out in the city of Palo Alto, our transportation makes up about 70% of the contribution towards greenhouse gas emission. The average, I think, in the United States is about 40%. So it's the biggest chunk of the issue. If you deal with transportation, you actually begin to deal with and solve the problem. And that's a really good thing. Okay, so 70%. By the way, what's the rest made up of, right? And what's the rest made up of globally? Anybody want to shout it out? What do you think it is? Somebody said it over here, I think. Oh, Roger knows it because he's heard this presentation before. It is cows. He's absolutely right. It's beef. Cows make up the next biggest proportion of gas emissions, right? And so if we're going to solve the problem, not only do we have to fix cars, but we have to deal with our love affair with meat. Well, I've said it for years and years, it's going to be easier to get people out of their cars than meat out of their mouths, right? So we're going to focus on cars for now. Later on, we're going to have to deal with this global problem we have, our love affair with eating red meat, which is not serving us very well, ultimately, both the planet and our health. So I want to talk about transportation. And in particular, I want to talk about cars for a moment. Like, I love cars, so it's a very fascinating topic. There's some very positive things happening in the space of automobiles and actually transportation in general that we should focus on and think about, by the way, through the lens of cybersecurity. Nothing I'm talking about today is detached from the core topic of the whole day, which is cybersecurity. There's a big connection here. Okay, there's a few little phenomena I want to share with you about cars, because we are all impacted by this. And I'm going to introduce a term called ACEs, something you can sort of commit to memory and perhaps use later on. You can take credit for it. It's open source. Enjoy it. The A stands for autonomous, right? Autonomous means cars will drive themselves. I'm here to tell you right now, cars will drive themselves. It's no longer a debate. A few years ago, I might have hedged a little bit. I might have said, I don't know. It's now 100% guaranteed. The only question is, when will it happen? I wish I knew the answer to that. It's not 2020, it's not even 2021. I would argue that it's a little longer than 10 years from now, but definitely within 30 years. We will have the vast majority of vehicles being self-driving. The most difficult time of all will be the transition. Imagine a world in which people are driving cars and computers are driving cars. That's the worst case scenario, right? We're going to have to figure out a way to separate them. Right? Now, why am I so confident about this? Well, one is just look at the work that's been done, but the other is get to experience it yourself. I've sat in several self-driving vehicles, and it's incredible. By the way, it doesn't feel great for the first few hours. Yeah, when you're on an interstate, hurtling at 70 miles an hour, and nobody's got their hand on the steering wheel, it feels funny, I got to tell you. And I'm not sure that I'm still used to it, but it's going to happen. And we'll get used to it. Our children will get used to it. Their children will take it for granted. I think, in fact, that at some point in the future, people will wonder, how were humans actually allowed to ever drive? And the reason I say that is because we're really bad at it. We're really, really bad. Now, the bad news story is about 1.4 million people die in car accidents every single year. 1.4 million. We're not talking about it. It's a lot of people. Millions of people are injured in car accidents, right? If there was one reason only to have computers drive cars, it's to save lives. It would be to save 1 million of those people who would go on to be great people and have children and families and all the things they would do. The next one is C, if you're following with the acronym ACES. C is connected. Cars will be connected, right? They're already connected in many ways. You probably get information about the weather and about things on the road and directions and things. That means your cars are already connected. I'll tell you about a quick little story. Audi calls me up in Palo Alto. A lot of the car companies, as you know, have their innovation labs in the Silicon Valley area. And Audi calls up and says, Jonathan, can we come over? We'd like to show you our new SUV. And I said, of course. How cool is that? I'd like to see the brand new SUV right off the production line. And they come over, and I go downstairs to take a look, and they invite me. They say, here's the keys. You can drive it. I say, I'm going to drive it? That's even better. Okay. So I get into the car, and they say, drive around downtown. So I'm driving around in this car. I got a couple of engineers and folks in the car with me. And I notice on the dashboard as we approach the stop sign that the dash is telling me whether the color of the light as it is right now. So let's say it's red. And it tells me in a counter when it's going to turn green. So I come up to the light, I brake, and it's got a 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. And then it goes to 0, and then the light turns green. Right? This is really cool. Where is this information coming from? Well, it's coming from the city of Palo Alto. We actually are making available our traffic signal data as an API to a select number of researchers and different types of organizations for the purposes of experimenting. We think this is going to be mainstream technology in the not too distant future. That's really helpful because what happens is when you stop at a traffic light and what happens is you check, right? You check texting, you turn around and look after a kid maybe, you put some makeup on or brush your hair, and the light is green for the last few seconds. Everyone starts honking, right? And then you drive. Sometimes what there happens is there's a fender bender because someone crashes into the back of you. And so having timely information about the state of the traffic signal allows cars to actually move more smoothly and more fluid. Cars that are sitting in traffic contribute towards climate change. You want cars to flow. And so it's real data, it's real numbers. Like if after multiple traffic signals you add up all that time, all those delays, or remove those delays, traffic moves better. Now you want to get rid of the engine actually because of the gas is a big bad part of this. So the next letter is E, it's for electric. Cars are going to be electric. In fact, we're seeing some amazing announcements from countries that they're going to ban the combustion engine, right? India, China, countries in Europe and Scandinavia are saying they're giving dates now. By this date, all cars must be electric. It's pretty incredible. And it's not 20 or 30 years. Some of this is in the mid-20s, 2020s, right? Cars will be electric. And finally, if you're keeping track, S is for shared, right? Shared means that we will probably not own cars in the future, right? Cars will be on demand. Don't take my word for it, just talk to the CEO of Ford. Talk to the CEO of General Motors. They're not going to be in the car business in the future because there is no car business in the future. What there is a mobility business, a transportation industry. But the act of building millions of cars each year and selling to people to buy is over. Think about the expense. I'm all in favor of this. Over 90% of the time, your car is doing nothing. And yet it's the second most expensive thing that you buy in your life, right? It'd be much better if we didn't have that expense if you add up gas and insurance and payments and all that stuff, right? But let's talk more broadly. Okay, cars are going to drive themselves. They're going to be on demand. That means lots of interesting other things will happen. For example, do we need parking lots in a world in which cars don't have to park? Right? Probably not. Sometimes I speak to our chief transportation official and I say, it's really, what kind of work are you kind of working on right now? What's the sort of future work? What are you grappling with? And he says, well, it kind of feels weird breaking ground on a new parking lot that we may not need in a decade or two, right? We've got to make some decisions now that will have big impacts in the future. But what else happens? Well, you've got all this time now inside the vehicle. What might you do when you don't have to worry about driving, right? Well, how will cars be designed when you don't have to worry about that stuff? Now, self-driving cars don't need traffic signals. So even the little example I gave to you about Audi coming up to the traffic signal with the information, that becomes sort of just an interim step. Ultimately, we don't need traffic signals, we don't need stop signs. We can change the very design of intersections, right? Now, what does this look like? Well, I want to show you a video of some research that was done at MIT, at the Sensible Labs, on modeling traffic flow without traffic signals. So here's your typical, and here's a road, an intersection where cars are no longer needing to stop, right? Look at that flow, pretty cool. How does it happen? Because the cars are negotiating with each other. They're kind of working it out, they're figuring it out. Now here's the comparison. The bottom is what we deal with today, which is very frustrating. Light after light after light after light. On the top you have a likely future scenario where cars just flow, and it totally changes the dynamic of traffic, right? We have a big shift happening in the transportation space, right? Our cars, just like our phones, are going to be computers that just happen to have wheels. Computers that just happen to take us from A to Z, but they're going to do a lot of other things. They're going to enrich our lives and be part of our lives in completely new ways. And they're going to change the very design of our cities and our counties and our states. They're going to change the design. They're also going to be a very attractive attack vector for hackers. Yes, our cars, because they will be computers on wheels, will become a very attractive vector. And we've got to be concerned about that. We've got to put the emphasis on that. The vendor community has, the innovators have to, and we have to as government workers and as technologists. Now, at the City of Palo Alto, we have a whole range of sensors and things to be able to understand our traffic patterns better. Here's an example of a service using that API I talked to you about that can tell us an awful lot about traffic in the downtown area of the city that I work in. I put this up here so you can visit it and experiment with it. The URL is just at the top of the screen. And you can see in real time the amount of traffic in Palo Alto, its throughput, how many lights are red, how many lights are green. Lots of really good, valuable information. We're just at the start of this because for the very first time, using sensor networks and connected cars, we can begin to see things in ways we haven't been able to see them before. And because of that, we can make really interesting choices. We can decide how to make an intersection safer. We can decide how to, where we should paint bike lanes or make bike lanes because we understand the traffic of cars and motorcycles and trucks in a better way. Now, let's go a little deeper into the phenomena of what's happening in our cities and how technology can potentially change how we design them, how we understand the data around them. We often talk about, and you've heard it, the Internet of Things in a city context. I love those topics often because there's a lot of slideware, there's a lot of webinars you can attend. But I like to see stuff. I actually like to see the infrastructure. I like to put the things into play because that's real, right? I could do a PowerPoint anytime, but I want to show you the stuff that cities are actually doing. And this happens to be what the city of Palo Alto is doing, right? This is what the Internet of Things looks like in a city context. It's a sensor. This happens to be outside City Hall on a light, right? And it's monitoring all sorts of interesting things. By the way, we have an intense focus on privacy and respect for PI and PII information. So we do this all in that context. So this one doesn't have a camera, by the way. We're not capturing people's faces. But we are capturing movement. And we know what the movement is. So when we capture it, what does it look like? Well, it looks a little bit like this. Right? This is not probably unusual to you. What this is the visualization of the data we capture with those sensors. Right? And it's doing a few things. The first thing is, this is outside City Hall. We have 3 stories of a parking lot beneath City Hall. And we actually, it's free. for a certain amount of hours, you can get a pass. We don't know how many cars are in there at any point in time because we have no toll, we have no counters, right? And so how do you solve that problem? I mean, it can be quite expensive and complex to solve. So what we did was we put sensors on the entry and the exit, and we count cars going in and count cars going out. This is the sensor. And now we know at any point in time how many cars are in the parking lot. We did that overnight, right? And it's not very expensive. We suddenly have new insight using sensors in a city context. The other thing we can do is we can look at parking spaces. Those green dots happen to be empty parking spaces, whereas the black ones are full. And we can provide that data through an API to developers who want to develop apps for being able to find available parking spaces. The technology is evolving very, very quickly and giving us new tools to be able to redesign our city. Now, let's go back to this picture just for a second. The focus is on the innovation, right? The focus is on building this little tool here. The focus is on what can it deliver, what kind of data can it produce. The focus is not on cybersecurity. And I would urge us to pay more attention to this. Now, there's good people doing good things, and eventually we'll catch up. But again, the Internet of Things in a city context is not abstracted from cybersecurity. These are connected. This is interesting, rich data for bad people, right? It is very interesting data, right? Like, we're getting the benefits of it, having real-time, useful, actionable data. Bad people will also use it too. So we got to think of it. This is a cybersecurity topic like no other. Because if you can manipulate or use the data in ways that are advantageous to bad people, bad things will happen. And by the way, they will happen, right? It's not a matter of if, right? Hackers will get into our city infrastructure as we do the cool things we're doing, and they will make very bad things happen. So I want to kind of transition because I've touched the topic of data. And I want to get a little bit more into data towards the end of my talk this morning. I've often talked about data in a number of different ways. First of all, I think data is the ultimate weapon of mass democracy, right? You can give data to people to be more informed, so you have a more informed electorate. You can give data to innovators so they can build solutions and change the world. And when I think of a city context, I think of a world of constraints, a city where, an environment where there's too many projects, everything costs too much money, there's not enough time, it's all about constraints. And yet, the one thing we have in abundance is data. Everybody in this room has access to an abundance of data that we could take advantage of. In the private sector, they've figured this out, or they've done lots of really cool things. Businesses now are literally built on data. After all, that's all Facebook is. It's a data application, right? And all the other amazing things that are being created. Government has been slower in identifying data as an incredible asset for change and positive change. So here's one example. City of Palo Alto, like many, many communities, has an app that you can use to capture issues in the community. For example, potholes or graffiti or abandoned bicycles, whatever it is, or lights that are out. And you can go around and take a picture of it. It goes to City Hall. City Hall then gets it, acknowledges it. We fix the problem. And best of all, we ask you how we did. I find that things like this hold public sector more accountable, which is a good thing, right? It raises the bar for all of us, right? So nothing innovative about this, right? Because this is done in hundreds, maybe thousands of cities now in the US and all around the world. But what's interesting about this is the data that's being collected. What's behind the app? Right? If you take the data and put it against a visual in real time, you can see the invisible. You can begin to see the invisible. This is what we call near real-time data of 311 data mapped against a graphic of the city of Palo Alto. For the first time, we can see volume of issues, location of issues, types of issues in a near real-time environment. Data allows us for the first time to see the invisible. We can think about the city differently. Like, why is there so many issues in the northeast part of the community, the southwest or something. Can we be proactive? Can we be preventive? Can we get there before the issue evolves? Or can we do work that stops the reports in the first place? Can we be proactive about being able to understand and react to our community? So we strongly believe at the City of Palo Alto that data is one of our most important assets, and we want to leverage it. Now, we're just at the beginning of this. We're not particularly far ahead. But because of that, we think that data should be made available to the people it really belongs to, which is our community, and it should be open by default. Not closed and then opened, but open by default. Now, if you're in cybersecurity, which I know many of you are, that can be a little bit of an unsettling comment, right? You want to open it up first and then close it? Well, you got to be careful about it. And so we have all sorts of gates we go through when we're determining what data is okay to make available on day one, right? We respect privacy. We respect the Department of Homeland Security. We are a full utilities city, so we want to be sure that we're not exposing anything that would make our utilities vulnerable, right? But we really focus on making data available to anyone who wants it. And by the way, despite all that, I believe, and I think many of us believe, that making data available is a responsibility we have as communities, right? Because we don't own it. I'm a temporary custodian of somebody else's data, and they deserve to have access to it. If you want to see what we're doing, I recommend and encourage you to visit our data site at data.cityofpaloalto.org. Please freely access this. Our data analysts in the City of Palo Alto will see a sudden spike this afternoon of visits because we monitor visits to these things. Now, what happens actually is people take that data, and you know what they're doing? They're building new innovation. Not only the City of Palo Alto can use, but all sorts of communities can use. So we have an application. This is one example. This is a company called Civic Insight, and they were built on top of city data. Without city data, they couldn't have built their application. We don't have to build this anymore because all we did was give away the data, and they went ahead and built the solution. I like that. We need to motivate the private sector and all the innovators that are around us to build solutions, have successful business models that make our communities better. Whoops, wrong direction. I have to share this because I can't do a presentation on our city without talking about trees. Because after all, Palo Alto is Spanish for tall stick or tall tree. And so we really love our trees. We love our trees in California, right? We particularly love our trees in Northern California. And here is using data to show the location of every single tree in our city. And because we collect the data and we store it and we make it available, you can click on any tree and you can see the name of the tree, the type of tree it is, when it was planted, if it's got any disease, when was it last cut. Good information. I never knew before I got to the City of Palo Alto how many people were interested in trees. We have an urban forester. I didn't even know that role existed. Right? Okay, so how do you bring people to use this data? How do you encourage people? Because it's not a case of if you build it, they will come, because most folks don't know about it. You've got to create incentives. And I wanted to share with you one particular model that we use that you can use too. Many of you do use this model, by the way, which is to create competitions, create events that encourage people to look at data, to figure out what it says, to build applications of it. We called it in this case, when we kicked it off, the Palo Alto Apps Challenge, right? And it was pretty incredible. We did it over the course of about 6 months, and about 100 teams participated, a lot from Palo Alto, but many from the Bay Area. And here's an example of three of the actual, on the left side, three of the students who were part of it, working with a senior engineer at Cloudera, one of the most interesting and fast-growing companies in the Bay Area. And you know, after the event was over, I asked a lot of the people, what do they like? And they said one of the favorite things they had was being able to work with some of the luminaries, the software developer luminaries in Silicon Valley. That was one of the coolest things. Now, when we did the Apps Challenge, we had 3 winners. We had 10 finalists, 3 winners. And what happened was we offered both a money prize, but also we offered to incorporate their ideas into businesses if they were interested. For a variety of reasons, 2 of them weren't able to do that, or they had other commitments. 1 of them did, and today, that's a successful business. That business exists. It's to do with pet adoption. It exists, and it has employees, and it makes payroll every 2 weeks. It's pretty incredible that we made available data, we created an incentive, and a business was built. Now, we're very fortunate, actually, where we live, that we don't focus that much on economics. Many, many communities, that's the number one thing, is creating jobs. We created jobs from this. This can be applied in many, many communities to create new businesses and industries. Now, people ask me, or say to me, you must be very happy that you created a business out of this, and you demonstrated, that this can be a model for innovation. And I say, I am pretty happy about that, but that's not why I think this was a success. It wasn't because of those things. What it was a success about, which I believe may surprise you. When we did the competition, we had about 100 teams participate. And over 30% of the participants were under the age of 18. That's what I'm most proud of. That's what I was most proud of. When I went around the schools in Palo Alto and talked about, how students could be involved in civic engagement or what they would like to do, they said, we have absolutely no voice. There's no way for us to participate. No one will listen to us. We can't go to a council meeting. Nobody will listen to us. And so this gave them a voice. They got to actually affect the community in a very positive way. And they were very excited about this. Now, what I'm excited about is, among those 30%, there are going to be people who pursue careers in the public sector. There may be council members. There may be mayors, state legislators. There might be a president among those people who change the future. And that's what we got to do. These models and this work we can do, this alternative innovation, can bring a whole new generation of people into a government context that can really impact the future in a positive way. Now, actually, I'll set this up in a sec. When I did this thing, lots of magazines wrote about it, lots of newspapers. It was quite a popular thing. In the days and weeks after the Apps Challenge, I was getting phone calls from all sorts of journalists in all sorts of cities, and they wanted to know, how did you do it? And so for the first few times, I was happy to sit on the phone and explain, well, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do that. And then I put down the phone. Then later that day, another city called up and said, hey, Jonathan, we heard about this Apps Challenge. How did you do it? So I said, well, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. I can tell you after about the second or third day, you're like, I can't keep doing this. This is not a full-time job. I can't keep explaining it. So how do you share? How do you tell the world like a best practice? Well, you write about it. And so we wrote about it. And I co-authored a book called the Apps Challenge Playbook that we wrote and we make available now to the world for free. It's available to all of you for free. And you can download it into for use in your communities. It's totally open source. You can modify it. You can change the Apps Challenge as you see fit. This has been accessed thousands of times all over the world, and there's been Apps Challenges all over the world as a consequence. I'm very, very proud of this. My colleagues are, the city is very proud. We have to share the good stories too. Now, I'm going to wrap this up and leave you with some big thoughts. Today, I have the privilege to share with you just the smallest slice of the potential work that all of us are doing and all of us may do in the future, right? Because I only had 45 minutes with you. There's a lot more to talk about. There's a lot more to tell in this space. It's very exciting. In all those areas I showed you earlier, whether it's water or energy or public safety, public works and IT, all are changing in completely radical ways. And so you might say, hey, this is kind of cool. We're well underway. Are we in sort of midstream to making our cities more connected, more intelligent, smarter? And my answer to you is, we've barely even. The reality is we're just at the beginning. And that's kind of cool, because you don't get the opportunity to be at the very, very beginning of a set of innovations and behaviors that are going to change the world in completely new ways. Redesign our cities, redesign the types of things we do, the work we do, how we go about our day-to-day stuff. It's going to change. So there's two things here that you can think about. One is that if you are an innovator, the opportunity is all ahead of us. It's not behind us, right? The opportunity to create trillions of dollars of economic value is ahead of us, not behind us. Who in this room is going to create the $1 billion GovTech business? The $100 million, I'd say the $100 million is good enough for me. And I don't need a unicorn. By the way, 10 million would be okay for me. Right? Who's going to be in this room? Who's going to do that, right? But the other side to this is a social good. You can make money and do social good. And that's really appealing. You can do things that impact people on a really deep level. The quality of their life, the health of their family. You know, when you innovate in air quality, you save lives. That's really meaningful, important work, and that's why I love it. That's why I love the work we're doing. And so the only question is really, there's a couple of questions you need to ask, but the core question is, what's going to be your role, right, as we begin this journey? And as, you know, cyber professionals, we need to enroll you. We need to bring you in order that you can help figure out all the attack vectors and how to protect them in this increasingly complex, connected world. We need it, and we need you in a very big way, right? Because the challenges are so enormous, and if we don't do it, the implications are so scary. And so I'm really here to recruit you. That's my bottom line. And my question is, you know, what's your role going to be in reinventing and protecting the future? Thank you very much.
We have a couple minutes. If you all would like to ask questions, raise your hand. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, sir.
So, Jonathan, in terms of the innovations that you see coming or that are necessary, from your perspective, do those need to be driven by folks that are in the technology space? I'm talking about in government, or folks that are in the policy-making side. Do they have to see the vision or have the vision? Who's going to drive that innovation?
Yeah, so Carlos Ramos here asked me, you know, with all this innovation happening, where's it really going to be driven from? Is it going to be driven from government, from policymakers, from vendors, technologists? In a way, my kind of go-to answer on that is all of the above, right? Everybody has to be engaged. I often think, though, that policymakers are lagging now, right? Whether it's Airbnb or Uber or you know, the need for you know, protections around net neutrality and things. It's very challenging to be a policymaker because the technology is moving much faster. There's a bit of a catch-up there. I do think what's happening at the federal level around self-driving vehicles is actually positive, right? The work that's been done at the federal level to put attention on cybersecurity, that's good. Even at the state level, it's very good. So in terms of the private and public sector, I think there's a much bigger role for the private sector. I'm kind of disappointed that we're not seeing more innovators begin to solve problems independent of government. I mean, if the only way you're thinking about the problem is to sell into government, I think you're thinking about the problem wrong, right? Think about the solution Nextdoor, right? Nextdoor is a neighborhood social network. They don't sell into government. They work with neighborhoods and communities, and they're massively successful, right? If we'd done it top-down, if it's City Hall that created Nextdoor, probably nobody would use it, or we get a small amount of people. Nextdoor decided we're going to build a civic or GovTech application, engage communities, and they've been very successful, independent of government. I think that's a very, very strong model for the future. But that doesn't in any way minimize the important role for all of us as civic innovators and government workers. We are part of it. We can be innovators. We can open doors. We can be open-minded. We can take more risks, right? So thank you for the question. Maybe one more?
How do you pay for like the sensors? Do you maybe sell the data to commercial companies who would love to have it, or how does it cost justify something like this? How much is feasible to put sensors everywhere, but the information is imperative?
Yeah, yeah. I think the question of how do you pay for this stuff is central, right? We have to become very creative about that because, as we know, all of us know in this room, and you probably were thinking as I was talking today, is there's lots of other priorities, right? I don't think we can be binary about this. We can't choose one or the other. We got to do both, right? And so, for example, in the case of our sensor network, it's a public-private partnership. In this case, the company is Verizon. There's a lot in it for them, right? They get to test in a living lab, right? They get to learn and experience what it's like to test this stuff, working with city officials. So they're motivated, right? We don't sell data today. I mean, it's just not part of what we do. So I wanted to address that head on. I think there is ways. So part of the answer is we shouldn't think of government paying and doing all of it. I want the private sector to step up and do a lot of it independently. Some of the work, like the sensor networks for whether it's air quality or water or traffic, we're just going to have to bake that cost into the solutions that our communities are going to need in the future. And my perception is that, for example, in terms of Internet of Things, the cost is dropping pretty quickly. So these won't be the tens of millions or hundreds of millions cost projects as they've historically been because of the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper. And then I think if you want to get into this topic now and start doing work now, there's a ton of other money available from NGOs and other agencies. A lot of the money is not used. I mean, some really great stuff that Bloomberg Philanthropies is doing and the Knight Foundation and others that you could just partner with them to tap into their funds. Thank you. Thank you.